Hello, third grade. Today we're going to look at chapter 14 of Poppy, and our last vocab word is the word vulnerable. Chapter 14. On the way to New House. The old porcupine moved faster than Poppy thought possible, body swaying from side to side, quills rattling like a snare drum. The trail Ereth took was narrow but smooth, avoiding hills, tangles, and fallen trees. From time to time, Poppy saw other animals, like weasels and a raccoon, a ferret, and once a bear. As soon as they caught sight of Ereth, they hurried away in haste. Poppy bounded along after Ereth, pausing now and again to gaze upon the endlessly enticing forest with delight and amusement. In the low places, white ground mist eddied gently, while above in the high trees the early sun soughed golden sparks among dark leaves. But once, while Poppy was staring wide-eyed at a particularly towering tree, she caught sight of what appeared to be a brown blur swooping among the pines. Her joy melted. "I think Mr. Wilcox is following," she called to Ereth. Ereth, however, did not more than grunt and press forward. Poppy caught up to him and then on stayed as close as possible, but with every third step she glanced back. Finally, she actually saw Mr. Wilcox. He was high above, gliding through the treetops on widespread wings like a silent phantom. "He is following," Poppy cried. "Bug brain," Ereth mumbled. Then, no matter how much Poppy searched, her neck grew strained from so much turning and twisting she lost sight of the owl. At last she decided he was gone. More relaxed, she paused now and again to take in the forest views. It was while she stopped to sniff a Scotch broom plant that Mr. Wilcox, out of nowhere, made a dive at her, talons flashing. "Wilcox!" Ereth bellowed. Without looking, Poppy leaped forward toward Ereth for protection. The porcupine, for all his bulk, whipped about and lifted his tail, prepared to strike with his quills. Mr. Wilcox pulled up short and hissed, flew aloft, and vanished. So there's Poppy in this picture. "That was close," Poppy panted. She was trying to see where Mr. Wilcox had gone. What made him notice him? What made you notice him? "Poppy, if you think there's anything that's going to keep me from that salt, you don't know me." Once more the porcupine trudged back on the trail. "Ereth," Poppy panted, straining to keep up. "I'm certain Mr. Wilcox wants to keep me from New House. There must be something he doesn't want to see." Ereth stopped abruptly and gave a snort. "Poppy, some creatures aren't worth trying to figure out. If they bother you, what I say is swat 'em with your tail." "Ereth, not every tail has quills." "You're right. I shouldn't hold yours against you," he set off. "Ereth," Poppy said after a while, "if I could find out what it is that Mr. Wilcox is frightened of and tell my family, I wouldn't care what happened to me." Ereth laughed sarcastically. "Even if he kills you?" "Well, no, but Poppy, if you don't stay alive, the only thing you'll be good is if you don't stay alive, the only thing you'll be good for is maggot mash." As they traveled farther, Poppy noticed that the trees were growing less dense. There was greater varieties of flowers, too. As the brightness intensified, Poppy guessed that they were reaching the northern limits of the forest. "Ereth," she said, "when we get out of the woods, where will we be? First there's a dirt road, and then an old barn, then a field of corn. Beyond the field is some low grass, then the buildings where the people live. There's also a new big barn. That's for chickens." "What are people like?" Poppy asked. Other than pictures in the magazines back home, she had never actually seen any humans. "Yeah, they don't bother me." "Do they dance a lot?" "What's dancing?" "It's gliding, swirling, dipping, and sliding with someone like you." "You are strange," the porcupine said. "Now don't try to distract me. On the short grass not far from the cornfield is the salt lick. You figured a way to get it for me, right?" "Ereth, I haven't seen it," Poppy answered. "It's beautiful, Poppy," Ereth murmured. "Really beautiful." They had reached the northern edge of the dimwood forest. Beyond the last of the trees, Poppy saw a dirt road. Even farther was a barn smaller than Grey House, a considerably older one. It stood on the edge of the field, leaning over slightly. The field itself was full of the tall stalks, bearing plump and tasseled ear of corn. Tossed by a gentle breeze, row upon row rustled and whispered with heavy ripeness. Ereth trotted across the dirt road. "Come on, move it." The porcupine scolded once he looked back and saw Poppy on the other side. "I'm checking for Mr. Ocox," Poppy called across. Though since the owls won't attempt to grab her, she had not seen him. Deciding he was either gone or hiding, she darted across the dirt road and rejoined Ereth. There's the salt. "Let's go," the porcupine cried, and plunged into the cornfield. Beating his way through the stiff stalks, Poppy paused now, and again in his wake to snack on fallen corn, which lay about in great quantity. Compared with the fallow fields, the mice scurried near Grey House. The profusion of food here was a marvel. Back home, the food the family had access to took long hours to find, and there wasn't that much of it. Here the food enough to feed a family twice their size. Was it this rich field that Mr. Ocox wished to hide? Did he want her family to go hungry? All that searching for food out in the open did make them more vulnerable. There's that word. So out in the open makes you more vulnerable. "There!" Ereth cried. When they finally burst through the far side of the cornfield, "Look!" Poppy sat up. Before her was a neatly cropped grass lawn. Not far from that stood a shiny pole as high as a cornstalk. It was capped by a large block of white salt. "Isn't that something?" Ereth whispered. Poppy glanced at her friend. He was drooling. Now that Poppy could see what she had promised to bring Ereth, her heart sank. How in the world was she able to do it? It was perfectly clear that even if she could manage to get the salt off the pole, it was too huge for her to carry. The problem itself was too huge to carry. With a sigh, Poppy looked farther. Beyond the salt lick was a white house. It bore the same resemblance to Grey House, but its paint was bright and its windows were newly curtained, signs that suggest that people were living there. Was this what Mr. Ocox didn't want them to know? Poppy turned to the left and saw a red barn. It was considerably larger than the house, but had only a few windows. The roof was highly pitched and covered with sheet metal. At the front end of the barn, the roof jutted out to form a door hood. Poppy gasped. Sitting right below the overhang, near the large closed window, was an owl twice the size of Mr. Ocox.